should get as little as 5.5 years. Yes, grotesque. The telenovela continues. The financial novella of Scam Sam. Last line she wrote, "I hope for his sake and the sake of the world." So of course, Scam Sam and his family, this is basically their last-ditch effort to try to get some kind of clemency. His new legal team making a lot of arguments for a linear sentence. Some notable highlights: he's called selfless, altruistic, no joke, altruistic, and even called a man who has committed his life to philanthropy. Yes, it's hard to believe, but the jargon of effective altruism is basically being utilized to the max. Other notable highlights include his mother, Barbara Fried, saying that she would gladly change places with Sam. With Barbara Fried and Joseph Bankman being in their 70s, she did say that her and Joseph Bankman face the real possibility that they will not live long enough to see him free again. That is actually pretty true. So this court filing called the sentencing memorandum, it's huge, 98 pages long. Some other notable highlights just from looking at the table of contents. One interesting point they try to make is under section 1B4, where they say the most reasonable estimate of loss is 0. Of course, that's not true, especially given that customers are more than likely going to receive dollar amounts instead of their crypto amounts, which of course would be valued considerably higher now since Bitcoin and the crypto market has been ripping. So the estimated loss is not 0 at all. Other interesting things, insights from the table of contents, section 2, under factors, under title 18. Through the list, they go through his early life, college, Wall Street, Alameda, FTX, then philosophy and philanthropy, where they make the argument for pages that Sam was never motivated by greed. He was not motivated by accumulation of money, after all. He was the world's most generous billionaire. We'll see how far these arguments get. You could tell that his new lawyer, Mark Mukazi, was really pulling out all the stops, of course, to try to push for that argument of lower sentence, trying to make the argument that Sam should get as little as 5.5 years and no more than 6.5 years. Pretty ballsy, but I guess that's exactly what you need to do. You need to be ballsy. Putting this into context, the pre-sentence investigation report by the prosecutors suggested a sentence of 100 years. 100, so 5.5, 6.5, quite a big leap from 100 years. The pre-sentencing report, which goes by PSR, where they go as far as calling it grotesque. Yes, grotesque, saying that Sam is 31 years old, first-time offender, non-violent, and of course joined by a number of other individuals, all culpable in the scam. The telenovela continues. The financial novella of Scam Sam. Never boring, always interesting, and, well, sometimes very funny. So all in all, Barbara Fried, Joseph Bankman, Gabriel Bankman, the former psychiatrist George Lerner, executive assistant Natalie Tien, the Stanford law professors, and others, they all wrote character references on behalf, of course, of Scam Sam. In Barbara Fried's letter, she writes about being a law professor, her background, academics, etc., but she writes that she only speaks as his mother, where she wrote that Sam is heavily misunderstood, and she wants to talk about Sam in the letter, the Sam that she knows, in a hope to shed light on his motivations and actions that would constitute a just and humane punishment in this case. She went over his childhood, how he was different than other kids, how he was a magnet for sad, depressed kids where their parents were getting divorced, and Sam would console them. She said that Sam, sometime around middle school, began to think systemically and globally about ethical issues. So after talking about his formative years, she goes on to say that there is a great nobility in his indifference to his own happiness, because apparently after November of 2022, Sam shared a lot of things with her and Joseph Bankman, including the fact that he feels indifference towards his own happiness. She says that for the first year of FTX existence, that Sam famously manned the customer service lines whenever he had some minutes to spare. Apparently, he was interested about learning firsthand customer-related problems and how he could solve them. She said that he shared openly with other FTX employees his struggles with depression. And because of this, in 2021, he asked Dr. George Lerner to join FTX as a coach, an in-house mental health counselor available to all employees. She said that Sam even lived in the geekiest dorm at MIT, and that the broader public was very charmed by his many eccentricities, or at least pretended to be, until of course he fell from grace and everyone blamed him. That his awkward traits all of a sudden became a sign of duplicity, or worse, that he was a freak with evil intentions because, of course, the financial collapse. So she fears, because of his many eccentric qualities, well, that he is in great physical danger in prison. Even though she says that some inmates may actually come to appreciate Sam. That actually a fellow inmate's mother reached out to Barbara to thank Barbara for Sam helping out her son. She went on to say of the crypto financial collapse that Sam actually took responsibility because he was the CEO, that the buck stopped with him. In the final page, she writes to the judge that he's only 32 years old and his whole life is ahead of him. And he faces the prospect of spending much, if not the rest of his life, in prison. That she and his father face the real possibility that they will not live long enough to see Sam as a free man. She writes that she was blessed herself with a relatively long life, filled with purpose, work that she cares about, friends that she cares about, and that she would gladly change places with him if she could. She writes that the U.S. criminal justice system, the punitive nature, makes us, as a country, an extreme outlier in all democracies, where she says she has no illusions about the redemptive power of prisons. That if Sam is behind bars for decades, it will destroy him as much as hanging Sam, because it will take away everything that gives his life meaning. Pretty interesting. She finishes off by saying this is not just a personal tragedy, but it's also something that society consigns young lives with so much promise to the trash heap. To the trash heap that it is a societal tragedy. To what end, she's asking. She does say that the financial losses customers and other creditors were facing, it is now clear they will be compensated in full. Repeating the claims in the memorandum, she ends by saying that if Sam is allowed to resume his life, devote the remainder of his natural life to leaving the world a better place than he found it. That with his talents and single-minded commitment to doing good in the world, there's a real chance that he would succeed, even accounting for the harm done by the implosion of FTX crypto exchange. Last line, she wrote, I hope for his sake and the sake of the world, I hope he's given that chance. Well, that is his mother after all. Can't blame her for trying. They probably should have helped him out a little more before the collapse and maybe even before his conviction. They try to make the arguments that some additions to these guidelines, these sentencing guidelines, should not even be considered because Sam was not allowed to defend himself against those charges. For example, the campaign finance charges, which ultimately were not tried as a specific charge, shouldn't even be part of the sentencing because Scam Sam did not get a chance to argue against them. They also tried to argue that Sam was not witness tampering against Caroline Ellison, the beautiful Caroline Ellison, of course. So I'll just go over the memorandum in detail. You can make up your mind. This way, I'm not just reading a news report, I'm reading the actual memorandum. On one hand, a lot of really good points are made in the memorandum. You can't fault them for that. You can't fault them for trying to make these arguments. On the other hand, there's a lot of shady stuff that has been exposed, not just by Scam Sam and the core group, but of course by all the shady lawyers involved, including multiple banks, even some located in the Bahamas, and even the company Tether. So a lot of complicated moving parts where possibly everyone was involved in the scam. Anyways, they write, the sentencing memorandum is respectfully submitted on behalf of defendant Samuel Bankman Fried. And funny enough, they start with a quote from Abraham Lincoln saying, I don't like that man. I must get to know him better. They say that Scam Sam has been described as a sociopath, a man with no morals, no remorse or empathy, who is an ice-cold manipulator, a bully, and a shameless liar. Being labeled one of history's most notorious fraudsters, compared to Bernie Madoff, Charles Ponzi, a robber baron, and even the devil, where they even quote John Ray right in the first paragraph saying, after looking at a picture of Scam Sam, that there's something wrong going on with him. But they go on saying that those who know Sam, they see someone who cares deeply about people, someone who's always been dedicated to doing good in the world, that he is selfless, altruistic, and a young man who has demonstrated throughout his life a genuine concern for those less fortunate around the world. What a good man. And this is where some of the starts, because they say that well before Alameda or FTX ever existed, that Sam had committed his life to philanthropy, pledging to earn money to give it away. Where they claim that as an intern at Jane Street Capital on Wall Street, he gave the majority of his earnings to charity. They continue that those who know Sam see his philanthropic commitment, that it runs deeper than money, because he's thoughtful, he's curious, he's well informed about complex global issues, including failing to note, of course, that most of that money was used for lobbying in DC. And here in these paragraphs, they quote quite a bit of people saying a lot of, well, really nice things about Sam. They quote somebody as saying that Sam wouldn't make small talk about your dog, but he'd subsist on bread and water to avoid eating an animal, that he would be uncomfortable giving me a hug, but that he would give me a kidney if I needed one. Next paragraph, it says, those who know Sam have heard him say that when 1 billion people live in poverty, spending, I'm not kidding, it says, spending on luxury items is immoral. They say that's why Sam has always lived a very modest lifestyle. Even as a billionaire, he drove the most basic car that was available. He wore ragged shirts and shorts. He cooked most of his own meals, vegan meat with vegetables, making enough for even his housemates. That Sam simply had no interest in material goods, except, of course, $30 million plus properties in the Bahamas. Pretty ridiculous statements, and honestly not lending itself to a lot of sympathy so far. Next, they say that those who know Sam understand that his conduct was never motivated by greed or status, and that portrayals of him living an extravagant lifestyle are nothing short of fabrications. What? They say that he skews materialistic trappings, that his focus lies squarely on the substance of his work rather than superficial appearances. None of this makes sense, of course, because everyone who testified against him said that all that he was doing was putting up an appearance, an act of appearance. His shorts, his hair, his car, everything. He even said himself that sometimes it's a bunch of lies that woke Westerners have to say for them to make themselves feel better. So, lies. This is too funny. Okay, so next they say that those who know Sam are sensitive to the tragic fact that nothing in life brings him happiness. That Sam suffers from anhedonia, a severe condition characterized by a near complete absence of enjoyment, motivation, or even interest. That he's had this since childhood. Pretty interesting. Never knew he had that. They say that he believes there's nothing that he will be able to do to make his lifetime impact a net positive. A devastating self-assessment for someone who has devoted his life to improving the welfare of others. That even if he had been found innocent on all counts, the guilt of all the damage he's caused would gnaw away at him for many, many years. In this section, they also even make the argument that Sam has been vindicated this year in January when the FTX bankruptcy estate announced that it could cautiously predict what Sam had been saying since November of 2022, that supposedly creditors will be allowed claims that eventually will be paid in full. Not exactly accurate, of course, but they make the argument nonetheless. The section ends with them saying that Sam is exceptionally brilliant, 31-year-old, who can still have a significant impact in this world, that the most productive years of his life should not be wasted away in prison, that he has great gifts to offer the world, that a sentence of decades-long duration would end Sam's ability to lead a meaningful life and contribute to the neediest in society, and would be greater than necessary to serve the purpose of Title 18 U.S., etc. In the advisory guidelines section, the PSR recommended that the court sentence Sam to 100 years in prison. They call it grotesque, where they give 2 examples where this kind of sentence is appropriate, including like terrorism and even someone engaging in sexual acts with children under the age of 12. They say that this court should reject the PSR's barbaric proposal of 100 years in prison. Too much, too little? I don't know. They provide a breakdown of the calculations given in the guidelines in the pre-sentencing investigation report, the report that gives the recommended years of 100, where their main argument is that all these guidelines are miscalculated, especially the one dealing with loss, where they argue that victims actually lost 0. They say that the PSR's report, their offense level calculations, are based on assumptions that the offense caused tens and tens of billions of dollars in losses, which they say is all completely wrong. So they point to certain guidelines. Under guidelines 2B1.1 is limited to actual, not intended loss, where they say that the PSR report refers to the government's characterization of the loss as actual and intended, that they're conflated, where they're both seen as one and the same. They argue that's not the case. So they try to separate the definitions for actual loss and intended loss. Of course, actual being the harm that resulted from the offense, and intended being where the defendant purposefully sought to inflict. Where in the following paragraph, they make the argument that there was no actual loss in accordance to the definition, and therefore that the most reasonable estimate of loss is 0. Ballsy argument, but hey, they gotta go for it. Here they go as far as claiming that the $10 billion loss is illusory. They even cite a case, Paris, where it says that sentencing guidelines for white-collar crimes should not be a black stain on common sense. An example given of how Sam is not motivated by greed is that by the time he was 10 or so, not a joke, it says that he had no interest in material goods, that he would be asked by his family what he wanted for his birthday, for Hanukkah. He would say nothing. He wanted nothing. But he was, of course, interested in the material well-being of other people, where his brother Gabriel went on to write that Sam was actually never interested in luxury materials, whether as a kid or an adult. That when he visited DC, he would sleep on the couch, they would eat at Chipotle, that they would joke about all the wealth and attention that Sam was getting, that Sam never took himself too seriously. Who knows? They also provide writings by a Dr. George Lerner, Sam's psychiatrist, and apparently the former in-house coach at FTX in the Bahamas, where he wrote the following about Sam. He said, none of this was for show, that he just doesn't care about what other normal people care about, where he wrote that it was an interesting reevaluation when Sam refused to speak at the World Economic Forum. Dr. Lerner said that this made me question his ability to receive normal ego gratification, whatever that means. The memorandum continues, stressing that because of the anhedonia, Sam gets no enjoyment from expensive and fancy things, that he apparently does not enjoy fancy restaurants or fancy cars. They're wasted on him. They write that because he only had so many productive years in which to make a difference in the world, he did not take vacations. Interesting. Pretty funny. They write that even though prison offers few opportunities to do good in the world, in the 6 months that Sam has been at the Metropolitan Detention Center, apparently he's been running tutoring sessions to prep fellow inmates for their GED exams, including helping inmates organize the relevant facts, research relevant law, to help them in their cases. They wrote that in the spring of 2022, the psychiatrist at FTX, I'm guessing Dr. Lerner, became concerned with Sam's lack of sleep, his poor diet, and even his lack of physical activity, where he told Sam that his focus on the work at the expense of his personal well-being could shorten his life, where apparently Sam was only concerned about the next 5 years of his life, asking the psychiatrist if it would impact his health for the next 5 years. The reason given, they put it simply, and I quote, he didn't care what happened to him after that, because he was in a unique position to help others right now. Not sure how believable that is, but anyways. Apparently the psychiatrist concluded that anyone who tries to understand Sam through the lens of normal human desires will misunderstand Scam Sam. Another interesting part, and probably a very important part, is where they point to Sam's condition, his mental health. They say that Sam represents a paradox, not because he's deliberately deceiving or conniving, but rather because that is how he is wired as a human. They say that he has exceptionally high IQ, but difficulty with conventional styles of communication. They point to neurodiversity, a concept associated with those with Asperger's, autism, HDAD, that it's all part of the spectrum of diversity of the human brain that exists. And of course, that Sam's condition manifests in a number of ways. They say this is not a disease and it's not a condition that can be cured, that instead it's a fundamental aspect of the individual's identity, in this case Sam's. And they say it's an important aspect that needs to be considered during sentencing, that Sam's neurodiversity greatly affects how he's perceived and how he perceives. They point to his inconsistencies in eye contact, facial gestures, and even tone of voice that can lead to miscommunications. Apparently, he has practiced facial expressions, even trying to force himself to make eye contact. But that coming up with normal, effective responses is neurologically difficult for Sam, or someone like Sam. They say this can be perceived as abrupt, dismissive, even evasive or detached or uncaring. Of course, the whole point of this is that he's vulnerable in the prison population, which of course might be true, judging from that picture that was posted by Tiffany Fong, the other YouTuber. Well, it looks to be pretty accurate. They say that individuals with autism are often considered at greater risk of physical harm, of course, and extortion in prison, more so than other inmates. Probably true. Rendering him extraordinarily vulnerable to abuse in prison, because those with autism may have difficulty responding to certain social cues and contexts, of course, some silent rules imposed by other inmates. Well, makes sense. And they say with the social dynamics in prison and with, of course, the public scrutiny, it is likely to result with him facing physical violence. Might be true. They even provide notes written by Sam at the MDC, where he says he's grown close to Sam. This inmate says that over the past 6 months, he's shown an immense amount of remorse and regret for mistakes that he's done that led to the collapse. The inmate ends it by saying that I'm not used to this. Every other person in here blames somebody else. They also argue against the guidelines, pointing to a specific single example where Sam perjured himself, because the guidelines are basically adding years, enhancements in years, to the sentencing. They of course reject all of this. 5.5 to 6.5 years maximum, down from 100. Is any of this going to work for Sam? Is any of this going to work out for Sam? Well, I don't know. But it's obviously not going to hurt. The positive character references I think will help, especially those from high-end, famous law schools like Yale. The arguments of loss, how much money was lost by the victims, I think it's a little fishy. I really think his sentence will be reduced from 100 years, for sure. And remember that he's the only one out of the core group who actually maintained his innocence. So Scam Sam and or his parents, they all decided to dump Mark Cohen and Christian Everdell, which were supposedly the hotshot lawyers that represented him in court, which of course, it was a complete flop. It was actually pretty embarrassing. They were replaced by someone who's considered more aggressive, a Mr. Mark Mukasey, who once even represented the former President Trump, which of course Judge Kaplan, well, doesn't seem to be a fan of. So, not sure if that's going to help or not. But that's a pretty interesting choice amongst the lawyeratis, an interesting choice because of all the political donations made on behalf of the family, on behalf of Sam, on behalf of Barbara Fried. So, according to the New York Times, Mr. Mukasey has a reputation for forceful court appearances, whatever that means. Maybe he's an actual pit bull compared to Mark Cohen or Everdell because they were chihuahuas in court, of course. Embarrassing. Also, it's worth noting that it was reported that Mr. Mukasey also represented Mr. Trevor Milton, the founder of the electric truck company Nikola, the guy who rolled the big trucks, the big rigs down the hill, all fake, defrauding investors. He was convicted 2022. Anyway, so the Times said that Mr. Mukasey scored a win in this regard with Trevor Martin because the prosecutors had requested 11 years, but the judge only handed down a 4-year sentence. So that's roughly 65% drop in the sentencing time. So that's a pretty respectable win. But Mr. Mark Mukasey is not handling the appeal. That's been handed over to a lawyer named Alexandra Shapiro. So she'll be mostly handling the appeal, which is pretty interesting because maybe they should also onboard Mark Mukasey with the appeal because there's not much drama left besides the sentencing. And the picture here is apparently Sam in jail that Tiffany Fong, a fellow YouTuber, was able to get. He's looking mighty emasculated. He's looking pretty sad. Apparently, law professor Ian Ayers and Stanford law professor John Donahue, they both wrote that whatever could be said about Sam Bankman-Fried, who was a brilliant businessman. Now, most people would just scoff at some of these letters, but you never know. They could actually go pretty far, especially if they get high-end folks, legal scholars, academics, writing letter to Judge Kaplan. Now, these letters actually could make a huge difference. So a friend of a friend years ago in New York City, they got in some deep doo-doo. So this friend of a friend ended up being a stowaway on a flight, somehow boarded the plane, had locked herself in the bathroom, was on drugs, had drugs on them. This, of course, is post 9/11. Anyway, so someone came to the bathroom and that person took their seat. So the stowaway ends up in this seat, right? But the person using the restroom that they had taken the seat from was married and the spouse was sitting right there. So of course that spouse said, hey, you can't sit here because my husband, he just went to the bathroom. And that's when the stowaway was found out. So of course she was arrested when the plane landed. It went from LaGuardia to Austin, Texas. They were arrested in Texas by the FBI. Anyways, the crazy thing is, I'm not making this up. Anyway, so the stowaway actually worked as a teacher here in New York. So what she did is she filed the legal memos, same ones that Sam is filing for leniency. And all she got was a fine. She had some nice social contacts, including a celebrity friend, write a letter. And that really helped out. So, you never know. Scam Sam might get a pretty big break. Of course, how much of a break he gets remains to be seen. So, March the 28th, big day for a friend, Scam Sam. Alright guys, well sorry for the long video. Alright guys, well that's it for this one. Thanks for joining. Please don't forget to smash the like, subscribe if you haven't. I'll see you in the next one.